Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts had careers in academia, journalism, public service, and business. He is the chairman of the Institute of Political Economy. President Reagan appointed Dr. Roberts Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy, and he was confirmed in office by the U.S. Senate. Dr. Roberts' latest book is How the Economy Was Lost, and I am honored to have Dr. Roberts back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Dr. Roberts, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I wanted to start off here with the corporate media, with former President Obama, the elite, and they're pushing the term fake news out there. And that's all we hear. Everything is fake news. It's let's fact check this. Let's look at that. What are they trying to do with this term fake news? Why are they pushing that out there right now?
Well, they are losing control over the explanations that are given to the people. The prostitute media, that is the print and TV media, not only in the United States, but throughout the Western world, especially Western Europe. This media produces news that allow the ruling elites to control the explanations. For example, they allow the CIA to control the explanations. They allow the banks in Wall Street. They allow the Israel lobby. They allow the extractive industries, agribusiness. These are the groups that control the explanations, and this has probably been true to varying extent throughout our history, but especially since the final years of the Clinton regime, when the media was concentrated into the hands of 6 mega corporations. 90% of the media, American media, which had once been dispersed and had the potential of being independent, 90% of this media was concentrated in the hands of 6 mega firms, so that all independence disappeared. The media is no longer run by journalists. It's run by former government officials and corporate advertising executives. And so it is much more easy to control it. And so the news that the Americans have gotten, such as Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, Iranian nukes, Assad's use of chemical weapons, Russian invasion of Ukraine, all of these things are fake news that are put out to serve the agendas of the ruling elites. Now, what has happened with the rise of the high-speed internet and the rise of lots of internet sites who challenge the fake news issued by the prostitute media, these people, this alternative media, they have gained a larger and larger audience. And so the elites are losing the control over the explanations to independent internet sites. And so now they're trying to shut up these sites or discredit them by saying that if you tell the truth is fake news. And the lies that we tell, that is, the lies that the prostitute media tells, that's the real truth. So that's what it's all about. That's where that list of 200 internet sites said to be Russian agents came from. That's what's going on. They're trying to retain control over their control of the explanations.
Do you think it's working? Do you think they are able to control it?
No, I don't think it's working. Mm-mm.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote an article. I mean, we know that Trump now is the president, and he had this inaugural address that he, spoke out to the people. And you were saying that the Washington Post and the New York Times, they were disappointed in what he said. What parts were upsetting, or what didn't they like about his address to the country?
Well, the whole thing was upsetting because he attacked the ruling elites. They were sitting there. up there around him. You should have seen the expressions on some of their faces. He was saying, look, these people have done nothing but sell you out in a number of ways. He specified all the ways, and then he completely abandoned the agenda of the ruling elites. He said, we're not going to impose American hegemony on the rest of the world. It's not what we're going to do. We're not going to let the global corporations continue to move all your jobs and prospects offshore. We're not having any more of these so-called trade agreements that empower them to do that, and all the way down the line. So he completely rejected the entirety of the agenda that has been ruling essentially since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So they're looking there and saying, well, there goes our place in the sun. He's taking it away. So this is why the New York Times and the Washington Post, these are the two biggest whores in the Western world. And their entire reason for existence is to produce the propaganda that sustains the ruling elites. And principally the CIA's. I don't mean the analyst part who try to get real information and present it, but the deep state part, the covert operations part. The covert operations part of the CIA has, I think, since the Bush-Cheney regime, been taking away explanations from the analytical part of the CIA. So that you've really got two agencies there now. You've got the analytical part that still tries to perform its historic function of collecting good information and being able to give good information to policymakers. And then you have the covert part, which has agendas that are identical to those of the neoconservatives, world hegemony of the United States, and which is very interested in protecting its budget and power by fomenting conflict. So these two parts of the CIA have really gone in different directions. But it's not the traditional analytical part that seems to be prevailing, at least not in terms of the stories that are planted in the media. So this is why the Post and the Times are upset.
Do you think right now that Trump is in control, or do you think the elites, they're still calling the shots? Do you think they're still do you think they're going to try to control him, actually?
Well, there's two questions.
Yes.
Yes, they will try to find some way of controlling him. Right now, clearly, he's calling the shots. If he weren't calling the shots, he wouldn't have given that speech. I mean, what's the point if the elites are controlling him? What's the point of letting him give a speech that points out how utterly, totally corrupt and anti-American they are? So what he did in that speech in front of the whole world was to send the elites to hell. I mean, this was a complete, total rejection of them, a denunciation of them. And if they were controlling him, he wouldn't have been allowed to give that speech.
For the other question, are they going to try to gain control? Do you think they are finished with trying to control what he does? What I'm saying is, will they take this to the next level?
Of course they're not through. First they tried to block him from the Republican nomination by demonizing him. And it didn't work. And that's when we began to see they really were losing control of the explanations. I think this is really about the first time, well, maybe, they tried to do the same thing to Ronald Reagan, but not to this extent. So the extraordinary assault on Trump during the Republican campaign for the nomination had no effect on the outcome. He just rolled over all the establishment candidates. And so this was the first inkling that, hey, look, the elites are losing control of the explanations. No one paying attention. They voted Trump. Then they, of course, redoubled these efforts during the presidential campaign. They were completely for Hillary, completely against Trump. Fantastic demonizations and accusations. And it didn't work. So we've had a second major piece of evidence that the elites have lost control over the explanations. So then they tried to really stop him from being president. They tried to influence the Electoral College to get them not to vote for Trump on the grounds that he was elected by Putin's interference in American elections. And that didn't work. And so they tried to delegitimize him by massive protest of the inauguration. We had the New York Times posting photographs of Trump's attendance with Obama's. And what the dirty newspaper did was it showed the attendance of Obama when he's there giving a speech, and they showed the picture for Trump in the early hours when the audience was just assembling.
Yes, they did. Yes.
When the people haven't gotten there yet. And all the pictures that we've seen since, and Brett Hume and others have made the point, it was a very large audience. Who knows? It may end up being larger. But these kinds of dirty tricks show a desperation. I mean, it is really desperate, because the Washington Post and the New York Times, they've essentially destroyed their own reputations to the extent they still had one, by this blatant, obvious effort to delegitimize the choice of the people. So, in effect, these two newspapers have come out strongly against democracy and against the electorate. So, no, they're not going to give up. What will happen? Well, it's hard to know, but there are many. The elites are defeated in the election, but they're still there. They will be able to carry on fake news, though I don't think it works. The covert part of the CIA could possibly orchestrate false flag events that would make it hard for Trump to continue with his agenda. The Federal Reserve could orchestrate an economic crisis that would move him off his agenda.
Do you think Trump's life is in danger?
In the end, it could be, yeah. If he's able to do anything. See, the real question is, can he do these things? Because even though the House and the Senate are under Republican majority control, the House and Senate, the members of both parties, they're not under Trump's control. They're under the control of the elite that provides their campaign funds. So the elites essentially control the House and Senate, because the House and Senate, unlike Trump, they're not a collection of billionaires who can finance their own campaigns. So they are dependent on the very elite that lost the election to Trump. So they can be used to block, to stymie, to delay, to wear down Trump's agenda. If that doesn't succeed, if somehow Trump is able to turn his presidency into a movement where the people are very engaged and vocal, this can make it harder for the elites to control the House and Senate. And the courts, they also control the courts. So we'll have to see. That may be all they need to water down or block or deflect Trump's attack. And even if he succeeds, the question is, who gets in next? Can they just overturn it all? When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president and came in during the Depression and had to govern during a decade of depression, he managed to get a few things done over the Republicans' objectives, but the Republicans have spent the rest of our history trying to overturn what Roosevelt did. And they finally achieved a lot of it with the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which let the banks loose again. So even if Trump were to win, After 8 years, assuming he makes a second term, I mean, he's 70 years old. Being president is a stressful job.
Yes.
What happens after 8 years? Who gets in then? Is there another Trump? Is there somebody that's going to carry on and protect this? Are there going to have been enough disappointments or enough things to blame on Trump that it becomes easier for the ruling elites to roll it back? So it's hard to know whether they will just wait and then roll it back, or whether they will say, well, let's take him out. It's just hard. It's hard to know. And taking him out, it could be too risky for them, because I think people will catch on this time. They're not going to believe what they believed about Oswald and the lone nut and the assassination of Kennedy. And most people don't believe that story any longer, but at the time, they were able to sell that. I don't think they could sell some kind of story about Trump. And I think Trump himself is aware that he's in danger, because he announced that he was going to supplement his Secret Service protection with a private security firm. So clearly he doesn't trust the official protection service. So I think it would be difficult for them to assassinate him, but it really just depends. They are desperate. Maybe they'll settle down and realize that they can win in the end, because what it would take to dislodge them would be a revolution. So and without a revolution, and it would have to be a very powerful revolution, whether it was violent or not, they've got to be dispossessed of their power, which means an assault on their wealth. And that's something that Trump probably isn't interested in because of his own wealth. But I think we'll have to just see.
I wanted to turn to the economy right now. I mean, Obama left office, and we know we have a lot of manipulation, like the unemployment. We know the stock market's completely manipulated. The GDP numbers are manipulated. And, you know, we've been looking at the economy for a very long time, and the economy is not doing as well as the establishment is telling us it's doing. And Trump is out there trying to bring jobs back. He's renegotiating NAFTA. He's going to be dropping TPP. He wants to implement a border tax. With that, just with NAFTA, the renegotiation of NAFTA, dropping TPP, and a border tax, do you think Trump will be able to save the economy before the whole thing falls apart?
Well, there are two issues here. The forces now driving the economy into crisis are the same ones that were there in 07, 08, and they stem, in my opinion, from the financial deregulation, which has not been corrected. And they stem from the fact that the Federal Reserve, the one that we've had for some time, does not really conduct policy in the interest of the overall economy, but in the interest of the banks, the big banks that sit on the board of directors of the New York Fed. So the economic policy of the country is conducted for the benefit of Goldman Sachs, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America. And it's not conducted for the workforce. Now, the only real check on the Fed's use of policy for a tiny few is the US dollar. And if the US dollar started collapsing, if it came under some kind of attack, and I don't know that it will or would or how that would come about, but if it did, since the reserve currency role of the dollar is the basis of American power, the Fed would have to abandon the banks and save the dollar. So with that as one part of the problem, let's go to the jobs. What happened to American middle class was that the high productivity, high value added manufacturing jobs were offshore to Asia because of the extraordinary difference in labor costs. And of course, if a Chinese worker who's making, say, 1/20th or 1/25th the wage of an American worker, if that Chinese worker is working with the same capital, the same technology, the same business know-how, he's just as productive. And so the output of the firm is not hurt, but the costs drop dramatically and the profits go up. So that's why the offshoring occurs. That's why Apple Computer makes its products that it sells to Americans in China. And so the growth in profits for the last 15, 20 years has been due to the falling labor cost by closing down American labor and using as a substitute foreign labor. Well, this also closes down consumer purchasing power in the United States and raises it in China. It closes down the tax bases of cities, states, the federal government. It hurts the Social Security payroll tax base, the Medicare payroll tax base. And so it produces all kinds of problems for the United States, but it benefits the profits of Apple and Nike and offshoring firms. So that problem can only be corrected by getting the jobs back here. How do you do that? Now, Trump says he's going to have a border tax, an import tax. But you see, this is against the World Trade Commission's rules. What do you call it? What is it? The World Trade Commission, I think it is. WTC, yeah. So lawsuits will result. And they'll say, see, we told you you couldn't do that. I think the only way Trump can bring the jobs back, and he doesn't know this, and there's nobody there to tell him, I think the only way he can do this is he has to change the way that corporate profits are taxed. He would have to say, look, we're going to tax your profits based on the location where you add value to your product. If you add value to your product domestically, you'll have a very low tax rate. If you add value to your product offshore, you're going to have a very high tax rate. And therefore, he can use the tax rate on profits to offset the advantage of the lower labor cost and other costs, environmental, regulatory, abroad. And in that way, he can force the jobs back, perhaps. What people forgot is that the United States consumer market was plenty large enough to support large-scale mass production. The United States has never needed global markets. And the growth and development of the United States was never dependent on foreign trade. It was always some minuscule amount of U.S. GDP. So to get back to that situation, that gives you, again, high value added, high productivity jobs in the United States that support a middle class. It brings back the associated engineering and software and research and design jobs that were the careers of college graduates, university graduates, who today have no such careers because once they offshored the manufacturing jobs with the rise of the high-speed internet, they offshored the software jobs and lots of other jobs that university graduates took. So this would, if Trump was able to do this and this worked, this would reestablish the ladders of upward mobility in the United States that had made the country unique as an opportunity society. You could get ahead without being born into the upper class. That was what was different about the United States. And that's what we lost with globalism and jobs offshore. So those are two separate challenges. I don't know what he can do about the Fed, about the big banks, about the absence of Glass-Steagall. This was a serious mistake, but like I say, whatever he passes if he's successful, that can be undone, just as Glass-Steagall was eventually undone. So it's hard to say how the elites will respond to Trump. It'll be a wait-and-see game, I think.
They keep bringing up the term Russian aggression, and it looks like the elite, they're provoking Russia, and it looks like they're provoking China and provoking many countries in all different areas. Are they looking to start a war?
They are looking to have major enemies that justify the $1,000 billion annual budget of the military security complex. They need threats, big enemies. It doesn't mean they want to go to war, though I think some of the crazed neoconservatives do. Some of the crazed neoconservatives there, they probably do want to go to war. But I think overall, in the military security complex, that Eisenhower warned us about, more than a half century ago. They became a permanent fixture after World War II because of the Cold War with the Soviets. Previously, if we'd gone to war, when the war was over, all that was demobilized. And the armaments industries went back to making consumer goods. But because of the Soviet threat, which was largely orchestrated, they have been entrenched for years and years, decades. And they have a huge budget, and they want to protect that budget. So that's why the threats. You see, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they didn't know what to do because where was the threat? So they kind of orchestrated the Muslim threat. But it's not a big enough threat. And so they moved back to the Russian threat. And now they've got the Chinese threat. So I think that's the main reason for the threats. Now, what they don't understand is if you convince other powers, such as Russia and China, that they're such an enemy that they may be attacked, then you do get close to war because they're not going to sit there and wait on the attack. And Putin has, on many occasions, the president of Russia, Putin, has said, look, you people don't know what you're doing. You better listen to us. You're making us feel threatened. You don't want to make somebody that carries as big a stick as we do feel threatened. Why don't you pay attention? I keep telling you, you're driving this toward war. Stop. But they don't hear, as Putin says. So there is a huge risk in that. And I think this is the reason that I was so encouraged when Trump said that he didn't see the point in conflict with Russia, and he didn't see the point in NATO 25 years after the Soviet collapse. So when you face the threat of thermonuclear war, the guy who says he wants to cool down the forces driving it in that direction, then that has to be your first choice for a leader. So I think that's why most thinking and thoughtful people voted for Trump, because war these days is not something that anyone survives. These thermonuclear weapons are massive, destructive power. They make the atomic bombs that the Americans dropped on Japan look like pop guns. So avoiding that is the most important thing humanity can do. And but you see, for Trump to do that, he's really telling the military security complex, look, your budget and your power are at stake. We don't need you to be able to have an enemy like Russia. There's no reason to have them as an enemy. And we want to do business with them. It's much more profitable. And they're threatened by this. So the military security complex has interests adverse to the interest of the rest of humanity.
There are many people predicting that the economy is going to crash this year. Do you see the economy actually making it out of 2017 whole, or do you think the elite, because you did mention this in the beginning of the interview, that they could try crashing the economy. Do you think that they would actually try to bring the economy down?
You know, only if they have to deter Trump, because they don't benefit from it, except in getting rid of a threat to their long-term agendas. So they wouldn't do that easily. I mean, it would have to be, well, it's the only way we'll be able to block his agenda or or get rid of his assault on our power and privilege. And I think they'll be slow to come to that decision. As for the economy collapsing on its own, I expected that a long time ago, and I've been amazed that they've been able to sustain it with myths and false information. And then it dawned on me it's essentially the power of the Fed to manipulate it. The Federal Reserve has a complete trading desk. They can trade anything. Traditionally, when I was in the Treasury, the Fed bought and sold bonds to affect the interest rate. And so it could control bond prices within reason, within limits. But today, it can control stock prices, bond prices, commodity prices, any price, because there's no limit on the Fed's ability to create money. And so losses mean nothing to the Fed. If they lose $1 trillion, they push a button, they have another $1 trillion. So if you've got this type of money and say the stock market starts falling because of market forces, all you got to do is go in and buy S&P futures. The market goes back up. If the gold price starts going through the roof, casting doubt on the value of the dollar, all you have to do is go into the futures market and sell naked shorts of gold, and it drives the price down. So when you've got this type of power, it essentially for years now has been able to negate or offset market forces. And the market, people in the market, the savvy ones, they realized, hey, well, let's go along with the Fed, because why do we want to go against them? They're supporting the market. We'll get richer, not letting market forces decide. So when you have that type of situation, how long can that stay afloat? It surprised me, and I've sort of come to the conclusion that it can stay afloat as long as the Fed wants, unless there's a run on the dollar. But I don't know who's going to produce the run on the dollar. So that's the situation. If you look at fundamentals, with all the money and debt that's been created, the practically zero interest rates don't make any sense. If you look at the source of corporate profits, which is not strong growth in retail sales, strong growth in real family median incomes, none of that is present. So what is corporate profits? Well, it's mainly lower labor costs from laying off American workers. So they're actually having adverse effects on the domestic market. So that's the situation.
Dr. Roberts, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Once again, how can people see your writings and your work?
Well, just go to my website. It's just myname.org, paulcraigroberts.org.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it.
Pleased to be with you.